The credo of the heavenly city of Gothopolis loosely translates to "Heaven is other people." Good works must be seen to be believed, and consequently great works must be seen by greater numbers. Paladins of the Oath of Brilliance were veritable celebrities, blasting around the city with incalculable speed, serving justice with immense strength, and inspiring their fellow citizens with immeasurable charm. Shining so brightly made them a target of dastardly villains, and often led to a very short tenure as a defender of the city. This was not an issue. After all, a star burns brightest before it dies. Longtime viewers of the show know I might have a little bit of a beef with a certain Jeremy Crawford over his ruling on Twitter that you can't use divine smites with unarmed strikes. But that's fine. People can disagree about things. I'll just make a homebrew subclass for it.
I've had enough of this, dude. Just cut it right out of the frame. Okay.
I also don't really love how hard it is to make a Z-fighter. You know, one of those people who flies around real fast, shoots a bunch of lasers, and also punches really hard. That's why I'm so glad I found historical records about this subclass. They were in the library of Annabelle Margaret, though her friends just called her Anna May. I had someone dictate these readings for me. I don't have time to do all that reading.
I have the power of God and anime on my side! Wait,
Hey everybody, Patreon plug. If you want the written version of this subclass, click the link in the top right corner and join at the $5 tier. Then you can read along with it as I'm talking about it and get a better understanding of what we're dealing with here. Now I should probably start talking about the thing I'm going to talk about. Paladin started off as a class that was so strong you needed to maintain a certain moral alignment to keep all of your godly powers. 5e scaled that back a little bit, put a little less emphasis on the alignment, but hey, Paladin is still bonkers strong. You get heavy armor, martial weapon proficiency, and extra attack. Unlike its more basic fighter counterpart, it is a bit slower, but it makes up for it by being a half caster and having access to some healing abilities, some of which don't even require casting. The spell list also has a lot of variety to both add damage and to heal and to do other things, like Find Steed and Find Greater Steed to make you a better Beastmaster than the Beastmaster Ranger. Tough Break Ranger. But the best way to spend spell slots is with the Divine Smite, which isn't technically the casting of a spell. It just adds a bunch of extra radiant damage to a weapon attack by spending a spell slot. Except that weapon attack has to be using a martial weapon and can't use your unarmed strikes. I guess, Jeremy, I'll see you at the Taco Bell parking lot outside of PAX. This is a bit. I'm not actually mad at him, and also Jeremy Crawford isn't in on this bit, so don't make this joke at him because, you know, it won't be fun for him, and it'll also kind of make me look like a boob. He seems like a nice guy. They also have some auras that help their friends stand up against more frightening foes. You can make your friends immune to frightening and give them bonuses to their saving throws equal to your charisma modifier, which is generally the secondary stat you want to invest in as a paladin. Oh, and the paladin, of course, gets these immunities too, so they're immune to frightening and basically have proficiency with every saving throw, in addition to the saving throws they already had proficiency with.
Weakness? None?
Subclasses get things even saucier with channels of divinities to get the power of literal gods helping you. Some of them even get spells that are fully nutty with the paladin's other abilities like Hold Person or Hunter's Mark. Most even get unique auras that get buffed up at level 18, going out to 30 feet instead of 10 feet. I'm gonna be saying aura a lot. Take a shot of water every time I say aura. Aura, aura, aura! Finally, every subclass has a special transformation that turns you into a boss fight for the boss you're fighting. Capstones in D&D are either fully busted, like for Barbarian or Artificer or Druid, or are basically useless, like Bard, Sorcerer, or Ranger. Paladin is definitely in the busted category. But there are still tenets for every Paladin. Whether or not your DM wants to stick to them is really up to them. For Oath of Brilliance Paladins, it wasn't enough to be great. You needed to inspire greatness in others. While their brilliant light often attracted people with pure intentions, sometimes the power would overwhelm them and push them towards zealotry. These paladins were a beacon of inspiration. For what is a light if it is not seen? They needed to surround themselves with allies who would revel in their success, or at the very least, rivals who would strive and push themselves to be better. Their actions must take place in the light of day. A clandestine approach was unacceptable. If their actions are indeed the will of fate, they will succeed. And if not, they will fail spectacularly. Finally, they needed to understand that it was better to burn out than fade away. There is no greater shame than disappearing disappearing into obscurity. It was better to go out in a blaze of glory than to surrender into the darkness. If one was able to abide by these tenets, they would be bestowed with the power of the Celestials who inspired them. Like all other paladins, Oath of Brilliance spells came from their commitment to the bit. These spells were frequently taken to make up for a lack of invitation to more stealthy missions. Zephyr Strike helped them get back into the fray, letting them avoid opportunity attacks, and once before the spell was over, add 30 feet to their movement speed, get advantage on a weapon attack, and add an additional d8 of force damage to that weapon attack. The jump spell would triple their jump distance, allowing them to clear obstacles and barriers, letting them move around like a shooting star. More on shooting stars later. Their speed was eventually enough to create an after image, with the mirror image spell creating 3 illusory duplicates that enemies could attack instead of the Paladin. But speed wasn't the only ability they could enhance. They could enhance any of their 6 abilities, giving them advantage on those checks, or an ally advantage on those checks if they preferred to inspire others. But speed was generally what they enhanced, and the haste spell would double their movement speed, add 2 to their AC, and give them an extra action to attack, dash, or disengage, so they could punch faster, run faster, do just about everything faster. This would even give them enough movement speed to jump their maximum distance, which is the best use of the haste spell. Erupting Earth destroys an area of terrain, dealing a bit of bludgeoning damage right away, and then turning the area into difficult terrain that they were able to ignore once they got freedom of movement with their 4th level spells. That meant that they couldn't be slowed down, restrained, or paralyzed in any way, and because the spells aren't the only things that made the Brilliance Paladin faster, this was a good spell to have on hand, so you don't lose out on that extra mobility. But since that later speed boosting ability lowered their defensive abilities, it was best to turn their skin into stone, giving them resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from non-magical weapons for up to an hour, depending on their concentration. Steelwind Strike was the ultimate violent flourish, letting them make a melee spell attack against up to 6 creatures, dealing 6d10 force damage to all of those that they hit, and landing somewhere within 10 feet of them. This was, of course, only for business, and there was nothing personnel about it. These spells were gained over the course of an Oath of Brilliance Paladin's journey, and would mix in pretty well with their other abilities from the subclass. By the time a Paladin committed to the Oath of Brilliance, they were able to channel divinity in one of 2 ways at the 3rd level. A Shout of Courage allowed them to spend their action shouting in a way that could be heard from up to 100 feet away. They had to concentrate on this shout as though they were concentrating on a spell, though using no spell slots. When their concentration ended, they would gain +1 to their attack and damage rolls for every action they spent shouting. The tremendous volume of this shout made it virtually impossible to do without starting a roll of initiative, but if they were able to keep it up for the full minute, that would be +10 to attack and damage rolls, which would be pretty great at total round 11.
I don't know what we're yelling about!
Some paladins preferred to bolster their allies instead. After all, there is strength in numbers. As an action, these paladins could use a Channel of Divinity to give allies within 30 feet of them a +1 bonus to their ability checks and saving throws for every ally they had within 30 feet. The power of friendship might actually be the strongest power of all. Eventually, the Oath of Brilliance paladins were so overflowing with the light of inspiration that it would stretch out their attacks beyond their standard range. At the 7th level, these shooting stars were able to expand the range of an attack they made with a Divine Smite by 30 feet. Of course, this would be using their charisma modifier for attack and damage rolls, as it was the power of their soul, not the power of their muscles, that was dealing the damage. They could even make Divine Smites with unarmed strikes, and by the time they hit 11th level and gained improved Divine Smite, that basically meant that their punches dealt 1d8 radiant damage plus their charisma modifier. It also meant that they had an at-will energy blast within a 30-foot range. But that range didn't mean that these paladins lacked the ability to close distance, just the opposite, in fact. They were also able to add their charisma score to the distance of a running long jump, and their charisma modifier to the height of a running high jump. With the jump spell, a paladin with maxed out strength and charisma could jump 120 feet horizontally or 39 feet vertically, though they did need to have the actual movement speed to make that jump. Zephyr Strike and Haste helped with that. But there were other ways to gain more movement speed at the 15th level of Brilliance Paladin. After 15 levels of inspiring, traveling, and fighting in the heaviest armor available, taking it off made the Paladins feel lighter than air. After wearing heavy armor for at least 1 hour following a long rest, Oath of Brilliance Paladins were able to doff it as an action to activate an all-out offense. This doubled their movement speed and gave them a flying speed, though they lacked the ability to hover, needing to land somewhere solid before they ended their turn or fall. The lesser weight didn't just help with their mobility, it also made them attack faster, making 1 additional attack as part of their action. These benefits lasted until the Paladin adjusted to the new weight. It usually took around a minute. While it was no doubt impressive and advantageous, since dexterity was such a common dump stat amongst Paladins, this lowered their AC to pitiful levels and made them very easy to hit. If they dropped concentration on the very popular haste spell amongst the Oath of Brilliance Paladins, they would even have to take a round off of actions and reactions, opening themselves up for more punishment. Still, the opportunity to look heroic in front of their friends was more than worth the risk. The ultimate ability for a brilliant paladin, brilliant enough to hit their capstone, rolled all of their training and techniques into one ability. At level 20, Brilliance Paladins could unleash their full power, doubling their movement speed, giving them a full flying speed with the ability to hover, and they could make 1 additional attack as part of their action. They also shine Bright Light in a 30-foot radius, and Dim Light 60 feet after that. With Haste and All-Out Offense activated, that was 240 feet of flying speed, up to 5 attacks in a single round, and up to +10 to the attack and damage rolls with a Shout of Courage. All of those took about 14 turns to activate in tandem with each other, so that's how long their foes had to kill them before they were fully powered up. Otherwise, they would just become an unstoppable force of luminous destruction. So how did these abilities pair with the rest of Paladin? Divine Smite, especially improved Divine Smite, benefits from an absurd amount of attacks, and the Oath of Brilliance Paladin had more attacks than any other Paladin. So how is this not super busted? Well, the big reason is wind up. Shout of Courage requires an action for every +1 bonus you'd like to get, giving your enemies an opportunity to hit you. All-Out Offense takes an action to doff your armor, so you give your enemies an opportunity to hit you with less AC. Dropping concentration on haste wasn't all that common thanks to Aura of Protection, but when it did happen, that was another free action that your enemies just got to hit you. Ideally, these paladins wanted to find themselves in a group of 4 or 5 people who are okay letting them wind up for 5 to 10 to 15 turns before unleashing their divine juggernaut against their foes. Personally, I think it sounds rad as heck, whether I'm the steamroller or I'm one of the party members trying to keep enemies off the steamroller as it gasses itself up. But I see it as a playstyle that could grind some gears if your other party members don't want to deal with that. Speaking of grinding gears, this is also a very loud character.
Loud noises!
You have to wear heavy armor for an hour before activating All-Out Offense, which means that you're clanking around with disadvantage on dexterity checks like stealth. And shouting to activate the Shout of Courage means that you're going to be getting surprise rounds few and far between. Finally, all the mobility is great if you're into mobility options like I am, but it does hit a point of diminishing returns. 240 feet of flying speed sounds amazing until your DM draws a 30 by 30 foot room map for your dungeon and says, hey, this is where the fight's happening, too bad. So yes, the Oath of Brilliance Paladin is good, but it definitely has some drawbacks. Some drawbacks that can be fixed with multiclassing. Don't multiclass with Paladin, just keep going in Paladin. Every level you multiclass out of Paladin is 1 level less of Paladin, and you'll miss out on the baller capstone.
I'd like to sing a little song about
Multiclassing.
This one's called Don't You Do It.
But if you're not going to level 20, there are a few levels of a few classes that would mix in here nicely to at the very least add some fun flavor. You might have noticed earlier in the tenets I said that occasionally Brilliance Paladins would walk down the path to Zealotry, and Zealot Barbarian pairs quite well with Brilliance Paladin, since you would get unarmored defense to make up for your low AC when you doff your heavy armor. Reckless Attack would make critical hits more likely, and Danger Sense pairing with Aura of Protection would mean that you could actually probably pass a few dexterity saving throws. I guess for that I'm just sort of pitching mixing Barbarian with Paladin, but Oath of Brilliance is a Paladin subclass, so mix Paladin and Barbarian. Speaking of things that just go well together, Paladin and Sorcerer. Since Sorcerer is a full caster class, you would get higher level spell slots to do bigger smites much faster. You could also cast Mage Armor to make your AC 13 plus your Dexterity modifier when you're not wearing armor, which would help offset the penalty of doffing your armor, or you could just go Draconic Bloodline and already have Mage Armor for free. Warlocks can also get free Mage Armor with a 2-level dip. If you go Hexblade, you can even make your weapon attacks using your Charisma modifier, which means that you are now a mono ability dependent fighter. You'd also expand your critical hit range against one creature, add your proficiency bonus to attacks against one creature, and you could dip over to Barbarian for unarmored defense and focus on your constitution instead of your strength, since you only have to focus on your charisma. All that would get going at like level 18 total, but it's still a pretty fun possibility. Fighter would give you action surge so that you could make a big flurry of attacks much faster. You could even take the unarmed fighting styles to deal damage with your unarmed attacks that isn't just 1 plus your strength modifier before you get the improved divine smite. If you went champion fighter, you would also expand your critical hit range for higher chances for bigger smites. Those aren't just random punches either, they're targeted, and every single one of them is more than 100% of their power. Monk actually works pretty well here. Unarmored defense wouldn't be super helpful since you'd have to mix dexterity and wisdom into a strength and charisma build to make that work, but martial arts would let you add another unarmed attack as a bonus action when you doff your armor, so you could really flurry. It would also make your unarmed attacks deal 1d4 plus your strength modifier instead of 1 plus your strength modifier, and if you did a 2-level dip, you'd be able to use Flurry of Blows for a huge spamming of radiant damage in your aura. But if you want to see if this build can power up before it gets taken down by the competition, why don't you join my Patreon? There you'll get access to this subclass and all the other subclasses at the $5 tier, as well as character sheets for every episode of Building Character. There's over 6,000 right now. That should make it pretty easy to set up a one-shot. At the $1 tier, you can even vote for the subclass you want to see next. Festival Domain Clerics can serve gods of partying, but they can also just be regular clerics taking a day off. And Dragon Warlocks serve the Draconic Warlords of a sect, getting phenomenal elemental power as a result. If you can't support the Patreon, that's okay, I understand. Just like the video, subscribe for more, and leave me a nice comment. Nice comments help the algorithm even more. Then come back next week for more from the Gilded Coast of Moria.